Good morning, goeiemorgen, dumelang, sawubona. I can manage 4 now. If you stay for the next session, it'll be 5. Ache. Welcome. This is our 10th year of Nation on Conversation. This has become one of the major content creators for the media, but also for shifting debate. Action only starts when you've thought about it. When your mind changes, then your action changes. If it works the other way around, you're in for trouble. I call that knee-jerk. So debate is about thinking about the process, thinking, analyzing, and then doing. And this is what debate in South Africa is. And you see the issues shifting. Things that were a major concern 2 years ago. All of us, the previous time we were here, as Theo has rightly said, we're talking about land expropriation. I haven't heard one comment this year on it. So all the things that you think are major issues in your life, 99% of them aren't. Focus on doing the things that's right ahead of you. We've had excellent topics and conversations throughout the week. And we've been carried, the message has been carried in all the mediums extensively. And we've had tremendous feedback from the industry, realizing what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're touching more people than we think. We have an excellent panel this morning. It is about technology, but on a wider scale, it's about innovation. Technology is just one of the aspects of innovation. If you do an old practice in a better way, that's innovation. It betters the way of execution, and hopefully it's also more effective on a financial scale. So technology, although we're going to focus on that, technology is just a subsector of the wider doing things in a better way. The last thing is something about that space between our ears. The question is, and some of you have heard it, who do you think is the most influential people in the next 3 to 4 years in the South African landscape? Maybe a good subject to talk to your family on over the weekend. Ask them and have a debate about it. It'll be interesting to hear what you say. But I hope your name is on the top of that list. And I think that's the shift that we need to make things work again. Start with yourself. Take the responsibility, take ownership, and do not let somebody else decide on your future. It is yours. This is our country. We need to take the decisions about it. Don't let politicians take the future away from us. Theo, so we look forward and to the panel. Shape up, let's go.
Thank you very much, Francois.
We're going to see a short video, sorry, Theo, and then we're off.
International analysts are predicting massive growth in the implementation of a few technologies in agriculture to look out for in the near future. These include an increase in the use of aerial imaging, digital field mapping, predictive local yields, precise water management strategies and nitrogen applications, data integration, and localized weather information, to name a few.
The fourth industrial revolution has created a lot of buzz around data technologies, machine learning, big data, data science. All these terms have been flying around. But we'd have to focus on the primary goal at hand. How do we improve decision making? Yes, we can use these data technologies to process data quicker and to process various sources of data. And so it does give us good tools, but we need to focus on the primary goal at hand, and that is informing decisions and distilling insights out of the data.
Although South African commercial farmers are known for their innovative spirit and for embracing new technologies where they see the value, there are some factors limiting the seamless implementation of these technologies in the local context.
In a South African agriculture environment, we need to be as efficient as possible. We have a lot of challenges, and that is challenges such as a variable climate, variable soil probabilities, and with that it gives a lot of challenges to producers. And to be competitive to the rest of the world, we need to be as efficient as possible. Part of this efficiency is the data inquiries, and looking at data, looking at new data usages, that helps the environment to be better and to be more efficient in order to make good, profitable decisions.
The big question around data is not only data availability and the quantity of data, but also the quality and the reputability of data sources. The goal we have is always to gather insights, to develop insights out of the data in order to make decisions, to inform decision making, hopefully data-driven decision making for private sector clients, so that is primary producers and stakeholders throughout the value chain, as well as government spheres.
There are many innovative companies working on digital tools to assist agriculture with data collection and analysis to improve their decision-making. But the reality is that for technologies like the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and big data analytics to really have an impact on South African agriculture, better connectivity is required.
Data gaps are a major challenge. For example, what is the contribution of the informal agricultural sector to various agricultural subsectors in South Africa? And as a follow-up, how do we measure inclusive agricultural transformation? How do we measure the NDP goals, and do we achieve them? Do we have the appropriate data to make these measurements and decisions? Our latest agricultural census is already more than 5 years old, and it didn't cover the full spectrum of the producers. That means we're making decisions based on old and incomplete data.
There is also a need to verify the reliability and accuracy of data in the public domain, as well as clarity on the ownership and security of confidential private data.
And so hopefully we can go forth and use these data technologies, big data technologies, to help us inform decisions quicker and faster and more often.
Welcome, everybody. This is a very relevant topic, interesting topic, topics that's continue evolving. But I've got one request, Dieter. Next time when the audience walks in, Creedence Clearwater Revival has a lot of great songs, but don't play I See a Bad Moon Rise. I don't think that's what we're here for. Welcome, everybody. When you talk about data and the usage of data, it reminds me of when I was a kid, a primary school kid. And my mother arranged a birthday party on a specific day, and it was going to be an outside party. We were going to swim around the swimming pool, so everybody had to bring their swimming attire, and we were going to be outside. The morning of the party, we woke up, and I was a primary school kid, and there was clouds in the air, quite a bit of clouds. And my mother, being a science and maths teacher, decided she's going to phone the weather forecast, the weather bureau. And she phoned them. And the conversation went something like this. She asked them, look, what's the chance of rain today? And the guy was like falling around. His answer was iffy. And she started pushing him. She said, no. I need what's the chance? I need a percentage chance. And the guy was going to and fro. And at some point he said, no, wait a second. If you want a percentage chance, I'll give you a percentage chance. And he went away for a while. About 30 seconds later, he came back. He said, the chance is exactly 25%. My mother said, that's great. You could have told that to me straight away in the beginning of the conversation, but how did you calculate the 25% chance of rain? He said, you know what, there's 4 weather forecasts this year. One oak think is going to rain, and the other guys think it's not going to rain. So you can utilize data in different ways. But let me first introduce the panel. I think we're privileged to have key role players in the industry. On my far side is Alf White. He's the Group Executive Digital Transformation at Senvest.
It is a difficult one.
It's a difficult one. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining the conversation. Stian Klute. He's the Manager, Region 1, Technology Strategy from John Deere AME. So welcome, Stian. We've had talks in the past. Welcome, and I think your John Deere is one of the leaders in terms of technology. Then we have Gerard van der Burg, Data Science and System Integration of BFAB. I think most of you has heard BFAB's name quite a bit. We've heard it around, it's been referred to, it's been noticed, and a number of your colleagues have been on the panel. And then Estelle Lubbe, the Chief Experience Officer of the Awareness Company. Estelle, thank you very much. Welcome to the discussion. Alf, I'm going to start with you. The data, artificial intelligence industry is sometimes dominated by acronyms. But let's just get down to it. Why is data currently viewed as an asset? And why is it an asset that we believe is going to play not only a critical role currently, but that role is going to get bigger and more important?
Gee, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. While you were saying that, I immediately thought of the definition of an asset. So an asset is something from which you can get future benefits from. So if you don't do anything with it, then it's not an asset. I think that's first off. And looking at the title saying data, we should actually retitle it and call it the evolution of data. Because data is by itself, on its own, is nothing. It needs to go through a process in order to become intelligence, and eventually from all information then become intelligence, and eventually contribute towards predictive models, and then contribute towards prescriptive models, because then it provides value to whoever the user is or whatever value chain it is part of. And if I can maybe try and use a simple example. So by itself, a GPS location is just data, right? If you combine a GPS location with an asset like a truck, with a cargo that it's carrying, then it becomes information. If you know that it's traveling from a certain point of origin to destination, and if you know what the congestion in the roads is, and you can reroute it, then it becomes intelligence. And if you have all the information, all the intelligence of all the trucks that's on the road, then you can start getting predictive models saying that don't follow this route, or that's the most optimal. And that's the type of value that we need to get and extract from data in the future to the benefit of agriculture.
Stian, that's a mouthful, but that mouthful is already there. Can you elaborate on that?
Atu, thank you. In terms of collecting the data, I think we are good at collecting data. We know there are a set amount of sensors available today at our disposal. The question is, how do we beneficiate that? How do we tell that story? How do we get to the data or to the information piece before even getting to the action piece? How do we unlock the information? I think that's the difficult part. There are two major players here. It's the customer and the developer piece, where we see a lot of billions and billions of dollars being invested in new solutions, but we don't see the traction on the ground. And I think that's a big question mark in between and a gap we need to bridge. But collecting the data and starting there and building that repository is good, because that is our value. There is potential in that.
Estelle, your point of view, your company, not only in agriculture, but focus and specialize in turning this data into something that you can make decisions on. How do you approach this in your comments on the discussion?
I think that so the approach is an innovative approach in terms of understanding the data that is collected, right, but also seeing how it can link together and what is the linkages between it. And then you start uncovering what the story should be. And then translating that raw data into that story so that you don't need to analyze it. And that's a key thing, right? You as a farmer or whoever is using the technology should not have to be a data analyst to understand it. So transforming it into a story that is easy to understand and you can immediately start taking action, that is the key. And not everyone gets it right. And I think the main point in that is that you need to make sure that you make use of specialists when it comes to that, to transform the data, and that you make use of specialist solutions as well to give you those answers. Because if you're not, you're going to sit with the raw data, and even though they sold it to you as insights, and that you're going to make decisions from it, you're still looking at a line graph. And you need to try and uncover what that line graph means. And that should not be your insights. Your insights should tell you immediately what you should be doing with that line graph. It should be way more than just a line graph, if that makes sense.
Gerhard, you specialize in data. You are academically underlined in the utilization of data. Estelle made an interesting point. The user of the data, in the end, shouldn't be the data specialists. Your view?
Yeah, thank you, Theo, and thank you for the opportunity. I interpreted Estelle more in line with the knowledge and the skills that you need to have to build that line graph, so that the end user, they don't have to do all of that thinking. And I think the skill sets, Theo, for today's discussion, I think is that's one of the most important things. So typically data scientists, or whether it's, doesn't matter which field it is, it's a growing field of expertise. There's a lot of new entrants, but that's a combination of maths and statistics. But there's a very common ingredient typically missed, and the word there is logic and common sense. And I think that's something that it kind of gets pitched very high. It's machine learning and it's artificial intelligence and all of these things. But I can honestly say in our learnings there's a very important substance, and that's just logic. And that logic, to me, takes the line graph to real insights and something that you can use for decision making, something that my colleague Marion mentioned in the video.
Just a point that for me was, you talk about that logic, and I want to take you to a simple example that probably most of you have read about. Is in the middle of the Second World War, America had a challenge with their bombers going over Germany, over Europe. And that challenge is the bomber is heavy, so every protection you utilize on the bottom of the bomber against, let's say, fire from the bottom, anti-aircraft fire, every layer of steel you use, you have to load less ammunition or less fuel, so you have to do the minimum. So what they did is they looked at all the bombers that came back, that were at bombing raids, and they plotted where the bullets were. And they said, okay, so where's this bullets on the undercarriage of the bombers that came back? And they found that there's certain areas where there's lots more bullet holes, and there's areas where there's no bullet holes. So the aircrafts that came back had bullet holes in certain areas, and in other areas, no bullet holes. The logic is that where those bullet holes are, that's where you strengthen the aircraft, but that was wrong. The aircraft that were hit there actually came back. The aircraft that were hit in the other places of the fuselage didn't come back. So you actually strengthened the areas where there was no bullet holes, because those aircraft didn't come back. And the assumption was that the aircraft would get equal amount of bullet holes beneath the aircraft. So actually where the holes were there, you don't have to worry too much, they came back. It's where there's no bullet holes. I want to take the conversation then. Now you talk about data, turning that data into something that you can make decisions on. One of the exhibitors, and they are here in the audience, a few years ago had a graph where they show that a grain farmer makes around 40 critical decisions during the harvest. And these critical decisions each has an impact on not the yield, the profit in the end of the year. So you have to make these 40 critical decisions, and that will impact your profitability. My question, and I'm going to start with Alf. Farmers use different sources of information. Different data is collected by different machines, different equipment. How do you start the process of collating that data?
Yes, I think just in listening with regards to logic in decision making, and I won't go into the details, but I believe that logic is a bit of a problem. Because for logic, you need to have a set and an assumed norm. But in data, it basically becomes down to that. You don't want to know when things are going right. You just want to know when things are going wrong. So whatever technology you applying, whatever data is coming into your system of information, whether it is just by means of observation or in conversation, from that you need to understand what is the exception to the norm, because the problem then needs to be solved, or then you need to become involved in solving that problem. So the way in which to go about it is to start collecting the different data sets and understanding what is normal and what is exceptional or what is abnormal. When do I need to get involved? And if you really want to translate data back to value or extract value from it, it's all about time. It literally is time is money. Because what does data do and what does efficiencies do? It creates capacity. It creates capacity, and as soon as you've got capacity, then you can do more. But it's understanding the norms and understanding what the exceptions are.
Stian, the point of that you should look at the exceptions, is that relevant or is there more to it?
Yeah, absolutely. You should look at the exceptions, and I wanted to add to what's right and what's wrong, and maybe, I mean, we're in a world of so many variables. That's what the atmosphere we're working in, and linking back to maybe things like machine learning, there are just so many terms and acronyms, and it's overwhelming. It's a daunting topic, and farmers don't necessarily want to engage there, because where do I start, and what do I solve for? So what I would think is link something. Where do you want to grow towards? You want to increase or maximize profitability. You mentioned what's right and what's wrong. So if you're right, then you assume, okay, cool, but can it be more right than that? Can you identify through exceptions? Are there trends that you pick up? And that's what the data sets could tell you, and the awareness company is very good at that, telling that story and identifying new stories that you weren't even aware are out there. So absolutely, too.
Can you, Estelle, elaborate? He noted you're good at telling stories. Can you elaborate on the principle of good at telling stories?
Yeah, sure. Taking what Alf said and what he said, and I mean, it's so much more than just analyzing what is wrong and what is correct and what is exceptions, because when you look at data, it's all equal, right? And even the fact that you have specific data points means that there are specific gaps where there's no data points. And if you really want to tell the true story of what's happening right now, analyze what happened in the past to be able to predict what's happening in the future. You need to actually look at the data from the past, but also the data that's not there from the past, which is a bit of a weird concept, but it is something that certain domains have started looking at, and they're getting it right, and agriculture hasn't started looking at it. It's a massive
agriculture
untapped.
Hasn't started looking
They
at it.
haven't started looking at it. It's a massive untapped part of agriculture. I mean, we've got large organizations sitting on massive data sets, historical data sets that hasn't just been analyzed for what it is, never mind analyzed for what it isn't, so that you can run different scenarios and see what could have been. And now what's really interesting when you start thinking about that way is that you would look at something specific. So say everyone's now complaining about the increase in fertilizer prices, right? And usually when you look at data points like that, you very quickly analyze it and say, okay, but this is a bad thing, okay? But now if you analyze it differently and you understand that it's just an increase on a specific variable, and you're able to run all of the different scenarios, what you can use as an output is analyze that scenarios and take it as a competitive advantage, if that makes sense. How can I take my agricultural business forward, and how can I be innovative because I've got all the different scenarios and use the fact that fertilizer prices has increased to my benefit? And yeah, it's a big thing to think about, because it's telling a story with things that aren't there, but it's because you have data and you know what the different scenarios is, it becomes really interesting. Untapped market, definitely.
But Gerard, untapped market because we don't know what the data is there. How do you utilize that? If you look at what Estelle was saying, how you take that forward from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. We've done quite a bit of that. In other words, where there's a data void, it's not a gap. It's like the Grand Canyon. So if you in a developed nation like the US or Australia or UK, etc., there technology from a system perspective, IoT and sensors and all sorts of things, they're kind of ahead of the pack in some way. The data captured, they realized we need a big engine room to analyze this data, but then you get to developing countries where, who actually capture data. And it's an interesting thing because you can have a producer, almost your analogy about the planes, you can have a producer that has trained his stockman to, just with the eye, to notice certain traits of an animal and teach them, effectively, if you select for this, if you select. So that's, in a way, that's capturing data. And a lot of time, data is qualitatively defined. In other words, we read it or write it or understand it. But the quantitative bit, and there's a lot of focus on the quantitative bit, literally the numbers. But the qualitative bit, a lot of times, if you don't appreciate and understand that, you don't get to the quantitative bit. In other words, to the actual numbers. So, in our experience, when you need to build that up from the ground, in other words, where it doesn't exist, there your architecture, and that's, again, a lot of time needs to go into that architecture. So I think with the data void, typically in South Africa, in agriculture data, there's a massive opportunity again to design it in a way, to get our architecture structured in a way that we can get the most benefit. And to some extent, what was lost with this data gap, I think there's great opportunity to gain. Especially, kind of the question you asked on harvester in the grain industry specifically. Great opportunity because there's heaps and heaps of data, but you need to untap it, like Estelle mentioned.
And the discussion, Stian, about qualitative and quantitative, because in a previous discussion, a bank forum, the discussion was also made that the emphasis at some point need to move to qualitative data. Otherwise, I think we're stuck in the position where you've got the GPS, but that's all you have. Yeah. How do you bridge that gap?
And I actually want to come back to the 40 decisions within a production life cycle. So a decision in isolation will give you a certain set of quality at that point in time, but it doesn't mean that it will make you profitable. So understanding how to increase your yield of a certain production unit is great, and you need to do that, but you need to know what decisions you need to make at that point in time, or from that production unit, compared to an industry and compared to a season, compared to what's happening in the world and all the different factors that's coming in. So in isolation, just making a decision that can be defined as 1 of 40 is not going to mean a lot to you if you don't know what the eventual outcome on profitability is going to be. And that's a challenge.
Stian, I want to get it slightly more practical. From a producer point of view, and you talked about the gap that is there in the terms of the producer and the content generator or the data generator. That gap, first of all, let's talk a bit about that gap. But secondly, what is the role of somebody behind the producer trying to do deductions as to trends or as to optimization? Because I would like to know is there a potential gap in terms of what I'm doing and where I can go, and how do we measure, how do we work around that? Because the utilization of data or information in the end needs to be to my benefit, whatever that goal is. But there's a number of gaps in there.
Absolutely, too. And the availability of data and the sensors, if we think about taking it back there and practically, what does it mean? What sensors, what inputs do we really have if you look at the typical grain farm? There aren't necessarily a lot what can you control? You can't necessarily control the weather. If you have pivot irrigation or form of irrigation, you can to a large degree. But if it's a rain-fed farm, what can you really control in the weather sense? Not a lot. Data can inform things like your ideal planting time, but when the moisture is there and we're in the season, we start up the machines and they've been idling in the sheds and they go. So what is that actionable piece? I think that is kind of what's lacking. So the gap exists. I believe we're in a dynamic space still. We're not static yet. We haven't found the answer, is what I'm thinking, in terms of serving the mainstream farmer. Yes, your precision personality, your your farmer that is really after that, and he knows how to analyze these graphs that you spoke about, and he knows how to see what they say, and it tells him, when he looks at it, it tells him the story. He's got that capacity and the resources. Not all farmers, mainstream farmers, don't think like that. I mean, you're expecting of a farmer to be the HR manager, he's got to be operational manager, he's the finance manager, he's everything on the farm.
And he's the chief technology officer.
And he is the chief technology officer. That's what we want him to become. But also, and again, then what is the expectation? What do we want technology to unlock for this farmer? We still have...
And we don't want him to be a data analyst.
Absolutely not.
I think there's something in terms of what's lacking is the partnerships, and let's call it the data partnerships. So what we've seen in agriculture is there's a big relationship between agronomy and the farmer, right? Because he trusts that advice. But now all of a sudden there's data that's being generated by different role players, different partners, and they're not passing on their data through
They
that
don't
supply
collate
chain.
it.
So if for an example, and we had a quick discussion on it, but let's say for an example there's a production planning, and we know we're going to use a certain set of fleet of vehicles or equipment at a certain point in time. It's got a certain amount of hours on it, and needs a service, and it needs to be integrated to make sure that if I execute, and if I don't do anything, then I'm going to need to service those tractors in the middle of my production. Then the combination of data between the plan, the equipment data, the mechanization service providers, those parties can then supply a solution back to the farmer. And it's about data sharing then in partnerships.
So you should be able to call the farmer prior to harvesting start or prior to planting and say, we believe in the past your vehicles were not utilized in this period, can we service them?
Absolutely, yeah. That's typical insights that you can get from it. And I think we're good at, there are point solutions that are relevant. We may be between a space where we want to have a generic solution that works for everyone, and you can tell them absolutely everything, and building towards that. And that's difficult because no farm is the same. Talking about the variance.
Gerard?
Maybe to add to that, and Stian actually mentioned it, the cost benefit of doing it, and it's cost benefit from a time perspective and from how much money you invest into the technology that will give you the efficiency gain or give you I almost want to say the future advantage. And I think a lot of times, in many other industries that has been quantified. It's almost to mention what Estelle said, it's been quantified, they understand it, the mining industry, for instance. But I heard the other day of, some of these big combine harvesters, with the sensors that they have, they're already picking up that, wear and tear in this part, and they send that back to the dealership, and there comes the dealership and say, I need to help you with this, and this component. So there the cost benefit is the producer didn't even know they might have downtime, but he had this upfront payment to acquire that, either big machine or technology that goes with it. But I think the better we quantify, I think the better adoption you'll get.
Absolutely, and the adoption also drives the quality piece. So the big data enables that. If we had a few farmers here and there on that platform, we couldn't have had those insights. But with the big data behind it, we're looking at, call it an 8R tractor globally. We get input from that machine, and failures are then recorded. And then if you pick up a sequence, but that sequence it becomes relevant because of the masses that flows through that. So when you pick up the sequence, it alerts you that something will happen. The expert alert will fire and say something is about to happen. Stop this machine, and the picking list will start populating at our RDC, and our technician will have a job card before the farmer even knows that it's about to happen.
And that's because data collected on other machines worldwide picks up a trend, and that trend tells you there's a problem.
Absolutely.
I think we also need not underestimate the sharing of information. Just a simple anecdote. A while ago, I was in the Northern Cape with a rented car, and the roads are open. And I was going nicely along this open road, and my phone rang. And it was a car rental company saying to me, I'm going a bit fast. That happens. Estelle, you talk about gaps between the agriculture industry and the rest of some other industries. Now, if you talk about gaps, there's an opportunity there. Not only gaps in terms of gaps in terms of data available, but gaps in terms of application of data. Where are those gaps? Because that should be creating opportunities for everybody involved.
I think we're still determining all of the gaps in agriculture, and it's mainly because everyone is still busy on this road of digitization. It's starting to become something that is more and more seen within the farmers, but not everyone has stepped onto it. And we were actually talking about it this morning, and it relates to the topic we just talked about, is the fact that it comes back to the ability that if more than one person uses the same solution, that the solution is being developed at an exponential rate, and you're getting so much more value from it. Where if you are just farming and you decide, okay, I'm going to take that step, I'm going to start digitizing, but you're almost afraid you're going to lose your IP, or you're not sure whether that specific tech company is going to do what you want because you have it in your mind that your process is very special, and you get someone to develop your specific app for you. The only thing that you've really done is you went from paper to a digital platform to do exactly the same. And yes, you might be a bit more efficient, and yes, you might save a bit more money, but you're not going to reap benefits from it in the future, where if you use a specific platform or technology that a lot of farmers use, everyone's getting feedback. Everyone's giving feedback on a whole bunch of different points. And those companies are really there to help the farmers. And I think a lot of people sometimes forget that that technology was developed to actually help the farmers. They're not there to steal ideas or anything.
To complicate. but now we're getting, and I'm going to want to everybody, we're getting to a very important topic here. So it means that if you only use data developed for your system, you might take paper out the system, but you're not getting the benefit of the data in terms of what could it do for you. So where does that leave sharing of platforms, sharing of information? Where does that leave that argument against, it's my IP, somebody's going to steal it, who's going to use my data? I incidentally have a friend who's very early adaptable in IT, and he said the wonderful thing is if he drives into a town, he immediately gets alert where a steak is on a special. That's wonderful to be in that position. And he doesn't understand why nobody else wants to know where steak's on a special when they drive into a town. Yeah. But why is this issue such a dividing issue in terms of sharing data, IP, my data, and not getting the benefit?
I think a lot of people think that when you do share your data and you share your processes, that you're going to give away something special that gives you a competitive advantage. And actually the opposite is true, is if you're actually going to get left behind if you don't do it. And so there's a lot of examples, but I've got one practical example where we deployed collars on a farm for cattle. And we've used this example a few times over the years because it's just so gripping. It was for a security use case, but the collar is sent through GPS locations. And exactly like Alf said, now you sit with just GPS locations. And for most of security solutions, you get an SMS to say your cattle is unrestful. But because we were able to tell the story of how the cattle moved around, we picked up that two cows were walking literally the same amount of distance at the same time. They stopped at the same time. They're drinking at the same time, everything. And because of the story that we tell with the data, we visually saw it. And so I called the farmer and asked her, why would that be? Because I understand that the herd move around, but if you look at the herd, they don't move exactly. And upon investigation, the one cow had cancer in its one eye. So they were buddying up and they were walking together. Now, something like that it's not going to give away your secret sauce or something. It's going to be beneficial for everyone if we can pick up things like that in software and warn you that maybe something is wrong with one cow because we're seeing this pattern and we've seen this before with sick animals. So there's so many examples like that, and there's really, I feel like there's a 1% example that is IP, and you should protect your IP. But most of the times, it's only becoming relevant when you actually use it. And when you use it on the farm, it's still how you implement it that's going to give you a competitive advantage, and it's not going to take competitive advantage away from you.
To add to what Estel's saying, I think that the big conundrum to me is the trust thing also. You know, that how I think in the past, unfortunately, due to data breaches, I mean, everybody reads the news and hear these things, and they almost question the integrity of the system that can maintain it and the security and all of these things. But from a big data perspective, the reality is if you don't club kind of in with the data, how, and that's why kind of in that introductory video, how are you going to make decisions? And a practical example, we did work in the Western Cape for the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, and they do a flyover. So that's really high definition. Every square inch of land gets mapped, and you understand it's grown, whether it's berries, whether it's nuts, whether it's citrus, whether it's wheat, all of it's mapped. And there was a big pushback, from various sources saying that we can't share this. But back then, Minister of Agriculture, Alan Winde, said the wider it goes out, the better for investment. And that was literally the case. We've analyzed that data twice already and kind of gave it back to industry. And it was phenomenal, the amount of investment that got generated out of that. So, again, it's big data, but the same principle can apply for whether it's monitoring planting densities or yield improvements, and which variables impacted that. And that's a contribution to the agriculture society. And if you miss that, I think you're missing a lot. And it's almost as simple as the collar example. But if you bring that into the bigger picture and you share that, because there's trust, I think there's a lot of gain.
I think, the trust component is the biggest problem, and I think it's because of a lack of understanding what data security is. Because a lot of times people won't trust a big organization to digitize, you won't trust them to digitize you, but then you get your cousin to make your application, and it's hosted on an unsecure web link. And I can easily go and steal your data, but you feel that it is secure because that you went that route. So the misperception of data security together with the trust is, I think, our biggest problem.
Yeah, the chicken and egg. I think if we realize what the value is that data can contribute, the access and security is something that can be addressed. There's tools and means and methods and everything for it. But if I have to just dream for a while and say that in an industry, in agriculture, in grain production, there's open markets. So whatever is being produced, there's a market for it, whether it's local or international. So assuming all those obstacles have been solved, if all the producers shared all the information about what they do, then it would be easy to determine the probability of change that you need in your production cycle that will make the biggest contribution to your profitability. Whether it is a mechanization solution, whether it is a pricing solution, a marketing solution on when to sell, whether it is a precision, prescriptive soil analysis, irrespective of what it is. And the data can give you that answer at a fraction of the cost of doing trial and error over multiple seasons.
I think what is very important there is that everybody would like to know what is the optimal profit or yield they can make on a piece of land, or on any activity for that matter, or per millimeter of rain, or per hectare, whatever your measurement instrument. But you would like to know that, and that you'll only know if there's data available to tell you what it is. In terms of this discussion about data platforms, your view, and then I'm going to go to the audience for a few questions, and then we're going to come back. But first of all, Stian.
So if I can maybe quickly just briefly touch on the journey that I saw John Deere took in this process, and how we managed to get access to data. So I think the trust piece was kind of overcome by us collecting machine data, not financial data or your practices. But we looked at the machines, intelligence, the harnesses, connecting all the sensors on a tractor. And for the last 6-7 years, we've been collecting that in South Africa and even earlier on in the rest of the world. where we are now able to, by 2026, commit that we will have 1.5 million machines connected. In South Africa today, it's around 2,500.
So 2,500 machines provide you with real-time information on a daily basis.
On a daily basis in South Africa, whereas in the rest of the world, we're aiming for 1.5 million.
Well, what kind of data would that be?
So that is all related to the machine health. You get sensors, temperature sensors, pressure sensors, and other more operational sensors, and it's basically a gateway for your as-applied data. So that's the piece of the way I want to get to. But so on the machine side, the mechanical side, and the predictive maintenance piece, that is very powerful, and customers were freely sharing that. They're happy to share that. The amount of trust needed to be able to share something like that is not necessarily, the risk-reward thing there is low. I mean, the risk is low, so they entered, and we managed to collect that. And the amount of the value that we unlocked from that is immense. I don't think anybody really expected that. But the next piece then is the agronomic piece and the practices piece. And I think
that's more on the combine harvester side.
That's more, yeah. But throughout all your production steps, it's actually throughout. And I think that is kind of dear to every farmer. He's got a process. His father and his grandfather, it's knowledge built. It's kind of machine learning in yourself. You taught yourself, and your predecessors told you that that's the way we farm this farm. And giving that away, and maybe it doesn't feel like high-value IP, but you feel like you're giving something of yourself away to a company, to a large corporate. What will they do with this? And we've started to open up and to our data platform, because we're good at collecting the data and what we apply. So we apply a certain rate of fertilizer. We can do it at a variable rate. You can import prescriptions and do it at that level, and there are companies sitting here that does that very well, the specialists that we need to beneficiate the data. So we record that it's sitting there, and we opened up, because we're not the expert in that sense, so we opened up our platform to say, use the as-applied data, use the farmer's data, if he gives you consent, then obviously, and add value to that, beneficiate that, give him the actionable insights. So we are seeing some good traction in that regard. There are companies that are really doing well for farmers there, and we really hope that will grow, and that trust piece will also build.
Trust. That word comes around, and trust means education. It means a long-term relationship. It's a 2 or 3 cut-edging sword. But yeah, let me open the floor for a few questions, and then we'll take the discussion further. Is there any questions anybody would like us to discuss or focus on a bit more? Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Theo. So I'm interested to understand data is one thing that the machines generated, but the average South African farmer, especially in the rural areas, have huge problems with connectivity. And, we have the Elon Musk of this world that hopefully bring technology that will solve all of that. But what are we doing in South Africa to address that as an industry so that our farmers get not only cheap data, but also proper connectivity? Because IoT and cloud data, all of that only makes sense when you can very quickly process data and give that insights back to growers.
Alf.
Thank you for that. We've seen from Senwese's side, we've seen that technology in terms of connectivity and the role players has really expanded. So your local WISP that would supply you with a connection within a certain town is now being expanded into the rural areas. So on the silos itself, we're seeing that there's more interest in providers wanting to provide access. There's new technology coming in. Vodacom is way more active, and MTN and the big role players are way more active than what they were in the past. And then you have the underlying technologies that becomes cheaper that you can invest in. So LoRa technology, just with a narrow band, low frequency, easy to translate or to send through small amounts of data that's relevant. Those type of technologies are coming into play. So it's certain technology providers, depending on what the solution is that you're buying, there are connectivity solutions for that. But it's still fragmented invested.
And to add to that, interesting, in close to Dar es Salaam, we did some work on the collection data side, and something like a feature phone, your Nokia 3310 type thing, our data was collected via a storybook, and it doesn't cost that producer anything. That's a 1 hectare producer, but collecting data of plant, and providing them back with information that's generated at a massive national scale, but pushed back to the producer to help them with decision making. We've seen a lot of that, and that's thousands and hundreds and thousands of small producers. Not to say that's where you want to end up, but I think what was fascinating there was just, there's connectivity is one part of it, but the innovation, then again, as Francois said with the opening, I think there's a lot of innovation with different technologies, and we think, smartphone, internet, fiber, but I almost want to say, if you keep innovating, and it was just fantastic to see. They got the price, they got, yield assumptions, when should they spray. It was just fascinating.
And it's if you had to give advice to a farmer with regards to data, is first off to understand, do you have any data? And if you have it, do you collect it anywhere? So the education that is required for someone to just collect their own data, even if they write it up in a book, then it means they can do something with it at a later stage. So if you're waiting for someone else to collect your data on your behalf, then you're just going to be following the market. If you want to lead it, make sure that you understand what you can do with data, what you have available.
I want to add to what Gerard mentioned on the old 3310. And that market segment that doesn't have a smartphone, that doesn't have access to finance, it's an untouched market for us. It's difficult to penetrate. I mean, you need collateral, you need bank statements. How do you buy a machine? How do we mechanize that market? And a company like Hello Tractor recently launched a product called Pay As You Go, where they can now finance, without talking to a commercial bank, finance a machine based on data, based on what was collected. A contractor will go and he will collect a certain amount of hectares that he can farm. He's got a relationship with those farmers. That's part of the underwriting process. Brings that to Hello Tractor, and they see, good, we can verify you will be able to service your debt. It's on a rent-to-own agreement for 4 years, and the ownership is transferred. So that is extremely high value. That's the biggest issue in Africa, is to mechanize Africa from our perspective, is access to finance.
I want to add on to that, then I'm going to come to you, Estelle. In a previous discussion, Dr. Ferdi Meyer noted where he sees the massive opportunity. According to them, South Africa has round about 40,000 commercial farmers, which are usually noted as the big commercial farmers. But then there's about 300,000 small commercial farmers, guys that also farm for a surplus. There's about 300,000 of them. And then there's 2 million farmers that are just producing food, but more on a level to sustain the family. But this 300,000 farmers that's sitting here, they are the untapped market, because for them, they don't need to have the latest technology. 5-year-old technology will make an incredible difference to their operation. So for them, it's not having the best, the latest, the biggest. It's just proper technology will make a massive difference. But sorry, Estelle, you were saying something?
And I just wanted to answer the gentleman's question in terms of the network. And I do think that in the past 3 years, I think it has improved immensely. Because 3 years ago, we were talking to farmers at conferences and events such as this, and they did not have internet at their farmhouse. And our entire discussion always went, well, step one is you need internet.
You need connectivity.
You need connectivity. And nowadays, I mean, this past week, I talked to so many farmers, and at least they've got satellite internet on their farmhouses now. And that opens the door up with technologies like offset, LoRa, and things. So the possibilities are now there. It's just a matter of configuring it to work for what you want. But then also just understanding what the value is that you're going to get back from it, because the input costs with some of these solutions are high. So you need to make sure that you're going to get what you are paying for, or you need to just wait another year or two until it improves.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Andre. I work in the industry, and I think one thing that we need to emphasize is the farmers must get themselves data literate. It's one thing your suppliers push information to you that you can utilize, but the farmer himself must get curious about what can I ask for next? Because that is where the ultimate IP comes in. I, as a farmer, can ask a question that my neighbor doesn't ask, and if I get the answer, I will have an advantage. But ultimately, over time, that advantage will disappear. But because I'm curious, I'm asking more and more and more. There's a bigger opportunity for the farmers if they get themselves more data literate.
A great point, and embrace data. See that as part of the future, so be part of whatever is available. A great point. Any other comments or questions? Yes, there, right at the top at the back.
So you touched on it. I just want to understand, so how can a farmer who is actually technically minded but is not part of some co-op or some big organization, how can they actually use big data on a practical sense? I mean, you've covered on, maybe servicing your tractor, but in real terms, are they actually ahead to where they were 10 years ago? Is there stuff that someone can say on my own, yeah, wow, I can analyze my own data, I can, what can I use there to actually just get ahead in a real sense?
Thank you very much. Estelle, let's start with you, and then I'm going to ask any other panel members comment. But Estelle?
I think the biggest advantage right now is with the technology that you use. And I'm going to use ourselves as an example. Because we've got multiple farmers, we're in a position now where we can start doing artificial intelligence on aspects like frost prediction. That literally gives you, as a farmer, access to big data without you having the big data. You've got one weather station, but because we've got weather forecasts and we've got 1 million weather stations everywhere, we can start doing analytics on it and warn you on something simple like frost. So it's bringing state-of-the-art technology using big data to you without you necessarily having to have the big data, if that makes sense.
Any other comment, Alf?
If I had to try and advise someone is to say that, do you know what data do you have? Where in the production life cycle is it? And what is the next step? Who are the partners? So if I don't have the ability to analyze it myself, it was mentioned earlier, you need specialists. You need someone that can assist you in understanding their data. It's to ask down the line, the next decision point, if I've got those 40, if I need to make this decision and I have this information, what can I do with it? How can it contribute? A simple example, just with collecting data and getting value out of it. I spoke to a producer just the other day, and he collected data just listing his animals on Excel. So immediately if you start doing that,
it's one step forward.
You can see what is the success. If I'm breeding, what is the success? And then you can take out whatever is unsuccessful and continue with what is successful, and it's just data.
I'm going to ask I see we've got about 4 minutes odd left. I'm going to ask everybody the following questions. So be prepared. The question is around, how do you see these things develop in the next 3 to 5 years? Which are the biggest trends? One part of the question. And the second part is, answer it more in an advisory capacity for farmers. How do they position themselves to be involved in this? And when you talk about this, I was surprised that in December I visited by chance a farmer, a family member in the Western Cape, and they just planted. They went into they decided to go into berries. So they planted specific berries, but not blueberries. Some specific other cultivar of berries. And when I looked at some of the trees, every 10 or 20 trees, there was a little measurement instrument going into the bark of the tree. And I asked him, what is that? And he said, I'll explain to you, but this is going to be, you have to think about it. He said, first of all, it's Israeli technology. That Israeli technology measures some of the fluids going up or down in the tree. I said, that's interesting. He said, that then goes to Israel. They then build a kind of a formula around that as to what's happening in the tree. I said, okay, that's cool. He said, because one of the risks is if I give too much water, the tree would not develop the roots strong enough. It'll get used to this water. So I have to take away water. I said, that's interesting. He said, but then This data then goes to Australia. I said, why? He said, because they're the specialists in this tree. And they then measure the prescription. Comes from Australia. I said, that's interesting. He said, yes, and the local guy's got the weather forecast data, and that then comes into the guy doing the weather forecast. And in the end, this data went to Israel, to Australia, to the local guy, and that determines the amount of water I'm giving this plant. And that is just, it sounds stupid, but that is how far we're going to go. So let me start, and I'm going to start with, Stian, with your side. How do you see the next 3 to 5 years, the major trends? Where are we going? But from a producer advisory side.
So, yeah, from a producer advisory side, you might be at a certain level already in terms of adoption. Or early on, what I would always advise is to take incremental steps and understand why you are taking certain steps. What do you want to achieve through that? Don't adopt because you know you're going to fail if you don't, and you see everybody else is adopting, or media is talking about technology, and you see drones flying around, and you don't know what's going on around you. Don't do it for that sake. See, what do you need? What do you want to achieve through this? And then take the incremental changes. Otherwise, it's difficult to see what changes had what effect. But those are the stories that they are good at telling. So they would probably pick up those trends. But be sure that you are doing it and working towards a specific goal. The future, how we see it, and in a bold statement that we've put out there, and we don't know how that world will look, but at the moment, and Gerard will know better, but we zone farming. We're not farming at field level, or farm level, then field level, then zone level. We're starting to get good at that, where we can farm each specific zone to its maximum potential, profitably farm that. And the next step is, how do we focus on each individual plant? So looking at the planter and technology available in the market today on planter, maize planting, for instance, you have singulation. So at the planting step, you look at the need of each individual seed.
So it's not per hectare or per farm, it's per plant?
Per plant, yeah. So at the planting step, we're there already. We want seed to soil contact to be 100% there. We want germination to be equal, so that there's no competition between plants. But throughout the season, how can we get to that point? So we don't know. We don't have the answer yet.
But that's where you're aiming towards?
That's what we're aiming towards. How can we treat each individual plant and set it up for success?
So you are moving from per hectare to per plant. And you believe, you don't know exactly how it's going to end, but that's where you're going to.
That's what we're heading for.
Gerard, where do you see the future, the major trends, and how do you position yourself?
So I think almost the dual answer to me on the farmer side, I think something that's really important actually ties to that question from the audience. I think communication and to speak up to get support and assistance is really important. I think for many years farmers have just kept quiet and, I don't know how to switch a computer on and I don't want a touch screen and all these things, but slowly but surely that adoption is coming. I think there's opportunity very similar to the accounting industry, where you have your accountant, you give them, I know, these piles of slips ending up at the co-ops, etc., but where you essentially get somebody to help you with that, and just to make the call out and to say, I need somebody to support me. And the second thing is, I think we need to invest in the next generation, like in big time, especially in South Africa. So the kids growing up on farms, they already, I almost want to say, ahead in technology, but take that time that's typically spent, I don't know, doing what on a computer, but focusing that to getting to grip with technology, with communication systems, with systems and systems thinking. Maybe last one, I think something important for everybody in this audience, it's a human factor. In other words, the appetite to work with data and to build it out and get more and more knowledge. It's X percentage of people that has that die behoefte vir it. And I think we need to appreciate that. So not all farmers would like to do it, but if there's a small chance in supporting them in doing that, and you need the support to do it. So I think in the ag industry, we need to invest in that. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, if we do invest in that, I think South Africa has the opportunity to do the classic leapfrog, where we build on the technologies from developed countries and we come up to par with certain technologies adopted for South Africa.
Alf, next 3 to 5 years,
So I think
if you had a crystal ball?
So I think one of the trends is the fact that there's more data being generated. There's more role players coming in, more technology. And data, the sharing economy is a trend that's happening more and more. So if you think about it, if you really want to contribute to development, if you share your data, you can contribute towards development. So it's a mindset of people that is more willing to start sharing information that is relevant, that can uplift communities, that can uplift industries, and that can make a difference to themselves, recognizing that value. So in terms of an advisory type of positioning, I would say that you need to make sure that your partners also understand data and that they can contribute towards your data generation and your data contribution.
And the key there is there needs to be a sharing element in that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the benefit.
There needs to be a willingness to share. The time and effort taken by human intervention to uplift someone, to train someone, while you can do it in volumes and scale through data, it does make a huge impact or difference.
Estelle, the last word is yours. If you look at the next 3 to 5 years, what do you see? Where will be the major trends be? And how should the farmer or the producer make sure they don't lose out?
So my first point is exactly what Of said now, the sharing. But then on top of that, it's not just sharing in terms of farmer to farmer or between organizations within the agriculture sector, it's also between the technology companies. So we're seeing a need to move away from you looking at 5 different systems or 20 different systems, which is trends that we saw in all of the other domains as well. So getting your data centralized, and that means that
I just want you to elaborate that a bit more.
Yeah.
Trend in all domains, what does that mean?
So it's the fact that so to make it a practical example in agriculture, you're buying a soil moisture probe, you have a soil moisture system for it, software, and you look at your little graph. Then you're buying a weather station, you have another software program for that. So what we're seeing is already now people started digitizing, they started buying these solutions. It's now needed to have it in a centralized system so that you can cross-correlate these data points. And I think that is what we're going to get a lot of questions and need from the market within the next few years.
So you see, but that comes back to your point of sharing platforms.
Yeah.
And that comes to your point that there's a benefit in sharing platforms. Otherwise, you're not getting it. So that position and what do you see in the market happening?
Exactly that. I mean, initially, whenever you start off digitization a market, the technology people are, this is mine. I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to make an API. You can't integrate with me. It's fine. I have my customers, and I'm going to get more customers. And more now, when we buy sensors and we need to integrate it, it is one email. What is your API endpoint? And they send it through, and it's integrated. So that is it is happening. So that is the first point. And then I think the second thing is that people are going to start focusing on how you can use data not to only save costs, but to make money as well. So how can you resell whatever sensor data you have, or how can you resell your communication or network that you put on your farm, but it's covering other farms as well? How can we benefit from that? Those are just 2 examples, but there's multiple ways. So I do think we're going to start focusing on that as well. How do you actually make money from your data?
That's the key. But saving money will help, but making money is even better.
Yeah.
So I think we had a great panel. I see that red, which you can't see, there's a big red sign that says time's up, time's up, time's up. It's flashing at us now. So thank you very much to my panel. I think it was a great discussion. I want to thank each and every one of you. I think this is the kind of discussion that will be ongoing for years and years to come. I do agree that we need to get this mind shift that if you really want to have the benefit of data, you have to share it. And you have to create platforms where multiple data inputs can be collated in some or other way so that when you make those specific decisions, you can not only make it to save cost, but hey, you can make money out of it. So thank you very much. Alf, Stian, Gerard, Estelle, thank you. Thank you for the audience. I think it was a great panel, great discussion. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.